everyone, Jason Gilbo here at jgilbo11 with Daily Fantasy Cafe, taking a look at the FanDuel optimal lineup for Week 12. And looking at the main slate, so no Thanksgiving, no Monday night, so that takes 4 games off of it right away. We got 12 games this week, so still action-packed. And looking at last week, it was a bit of a down week for the article and podcast I posted. Week 11, we didn't really see a big blunt week against the Niners as we expected. A whole touchdown brought a holding call brought it back. It was a solid yardage game, but overall wasn't really worth it. It was certainly one of those ones where if you faded, you did a pretty good job. Andrew Luck wasn't really a big one either. Had a great first half. It looked like he was on his way for another great game. Then completely collapsed in the second half due to concussion, due to just taking the foot off the gas. Who knows? AJ Green obviously went down, posted a big 0. That was a basically a lineup killer within the GPP and stacking one, so it was kind of a struggle there. Outside of that, I mean, Titans calls, Mariota was fine. Delaney Walker was not. He was one of the bigger duds. We also saw, Minnesota basically be a great call. They weren't great defensively, but they, had the 2 touchdowns that really helped out. So we look forward here to Week 12. Hopefully everyone stays healthy and kind of comes through again. And looking at the GPP and cash projection lineups. So my thing here, obviously, if you saw my, DK podcast, if you saw FanDuel, I differ a little bit with how things are constructed this week. I like Cam Newton. I like him more in GPPs. I like Wilson in cash. So obviously, Optimizer is rolling Newton in cash and Wilson in GPPs, which is a little bit odd for me. So personally, that's just my take. I like using it reverse. And if you like that route too, it's just an easy swap because obviously, Russell Wilson is a little bit cheaper. He's $300 cheaper. So I don't really mind the matchups for them this week. Obviously, the Raiders have struggled in the secondary at times. Newton does have that rushing upside, which is why I like him in GPPs. But the Carolina offense really hasn't been that great this year. It hasn't been reliable. And then we've seen Seattle over the last 3 weeks or so. Once Wilson's, basically been 100%, we've seen this offense really look like it did in the second half last year. And it's something that you really want to target, and it's not expensive, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's my take. I like Newton, I like Wilson, but I think I'd rather just flip-flop. We also see Melvin Gordon and David Johnson here in both lineups, and obviously both of them have tremendous upside. Both of them are absolute workhorses. They're expensive, but when we look at the wide receivers here shortly, I think it's a great move this week to kind of pay down. Obviously there's no Antonio Brown. Odell Beckham's in play, but more of a GPP play for me. Julio Jones going to see some Patrick Peterson, so that's a little bit tough. I do like Amari Cooper, who we'll talk about. So I think with the prices of some of these guys, it makes it easier to fit in a Melvin Gordon and David Johnson, and both of them are in great matchups as well. Atlanta has struggled against pass catching backs, same with Houston. We've also seen Houston really struggle, and Atlanta also just struggle against the run in general. So they're pricey, but given the fact that, Russell Wilson's cheap, Newton's cheap, they fit in pretty nicely. And then we get into the wide receivers. Larry Fitzgerald, just 7,200 in a game where I expect him to trying to be keeping pace with each other. And I think Fitzgerald's a relatively solid option. And he pops up a little bit later in the stacking. But we look at Fitzgerald, averaging 10.7 targets per game, third among wideouts this year. Baldwin averages about 7. Both of them are pretty safe cornerback matchups as well. They'll both be in my article that drops on Friday, the wide receiver cornerback matchup grades. You can check that out. So I do like them, and I do like them both in GPPs and cash games this week, so I do like the fact that they are pairing them together. And then we see Rashard Matthews comes up here at 6,200, who kind of evens out the field. Definitely don't mind him this week against Chicago. Pretty average pass defense. Rashard Matthews is being used a lot more over the last few weeks. The targets have been there. The red zone usage has been there, so I definitely don't mind him. I think he has a reasonable cash game play this week. Is he anything to get excited about? No, but I do like him just kind of as a third option. We also see him in the GPP one. So looking at the tight ends, Amari Cooper here, we'll talk about 7,800. I like him a lot this week. Carolina has really struggled against opposing wide receiver ones. They rank 27th, 16.5% DVOA. As I mentioned, no Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, seeing Patrick Peterson, Odell Beckham in a matchup against Joe Hayden, which, obviously OBJ can torch him, but I do like spinning down a little bit to Cooper, who I think is going to be one of the elite wide receivers this week, and he's not really priced up enough enough to where I'm like, okay, I feel a little bit iffy about it because he has been relatively inconsistent. But I think you look at the game logs, it has been a lot of matchup-based ones where he struggled in the matchups. Obviously, Houston was a bit inspiring for this week because Houston is loaded with some good corners, and he did, end up finding the end zone. So 7,800, really like that there. And then we get into tight ends. I actually like both these tight ends quite a bit here, and I didn't have any involvement as I normally don't. I just run these through. CJ Fedorowicz, 5,200. He is the catch game value for me this week. And then if you want another value play, Vance McDonald's the GPP value. So the way that worked out perfectly was kind of surprising, and it makes me feel a little bit better that, I'm looking at those guys as well. So I definitely like using those two. Fedorowicz obviously is a little bit safer, Vance McDonald, and a less than stellar offense. I mean, both of them are, but Vance McDonald, 6 targets in each of the last 4 games. Fedorowicz has been above double-digit FanDuel points in 4 of the last 7. 3 of those games where he didn't, really tough matchups, so I think he gets a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And then we move into the defenses here. Kansas City, last week we saw Minnesota take about a $500, $700 drop. Chiefs are doing about the same this week. So it's going with a similar strategy. I like Chiefs and GPPs. I like Baltimore at the same price in cash games. I feel like it's just a little bit safer against the Cincinnati offense that's without A.J. Green and Giovanni Bernard, also on the road. So I think that's one of the big things. Chiefs, if they were at home, I'd feel a little bit safer, but still a GPP team. So I'm definitely not going to argue with the way our optimizer has been rolling out defenses this season. Optimal GPP stack, I see Seattle, and I think it is the most optimal because the price is really there. And fitting it in with Melvin Gordon and David Johnson and Fitzgerald is another plus. We saw a drop down at the 3rd wide receiver spot as expected to get Jimmy Graham in there. It's Kendall Wright, who's been kind of a boomer bust play the last few weeks. Seattle stock, $21,200, 35% of your FanDuel salary, so really not that expensive. 25.5 team total, possibly a banged up backfield that could force Russell Wilson to throw a little bit more. Even though they're coming across the country, I don't particularly worry. Wilson's, home road splits really haven't been that significant. And you're looking at Wilson at a really nice price. Baldwin under 7K, under 7K. Graham under 7K, just barely. And then you're just kind of fitting them in with good Cardinals pieces with Melvin Gordon. I think there's a lot to like in terms of upside here. And you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck. So in terms of the optimal lineup, I do like this quite a bit. Kendall Wright, obviously not my favorite piece. If you wanted to drop down a running back and bump him up, I think that's also a way you can go to kind of differentiate yourself. But there is a lot of upside there. So that's going to wrap things up with the FanDuel optimal lineup and stack review for week 12. If you want to head on over to read and read the article, it is up on dailyfantasycafe.com. Be sure to check out the rest of our week 12 content.